Hi, Carol. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We're going to start in about 4 minutes. Good evening, Marianne. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to start shortly. Hello, Asher. Hey, Dawn. Hey, Irene. Hi, Lori. Hi, Marianne. Hey, Mary. Thank you so much for joining. We are going to get started in approximately 2 minutes. Thank you all for being here. Good evening, Virginia. Hello, Judy. Hi, it's good to see you on. I see some people are still popping in. Thank you all for being here tonight. We are going to get started very, very shortly. Give a couple more minutes for people to join. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, it is 7 o'clock. Hello, hello, welcome, good evening, and welcome to Housing Part 1, brought to you by NAMI Cook County North Suburban and Beth Nabors. Hey, Beth.
Hello.
I am Bree Hookstra. I am the program director here at NAMI Cook County North Suburban. NAMI, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization, providing public awareness at no cost, support, and education programs online and in person, so that people and families affected by mental health conditions can build better lives. We are the lifeline to individuals and families who do not know what to expect in their difficult life journey. We offer classes and support groups and do a lot of advocacy for mental health. Our programs are free and open to those in our 20 community service areas, but we don't turn anyone away who is in need. Our topic tonight deals with housing, specifically the housing crisis, including the lack of supportive and affordable housing for people with disabilities mental health, and/or substance abuse issues. The housing crisis continues to be a pressing issue in many regions. Some trends include homelessness, affordable housing shortages, rent burden, evictions, and more. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, on a given night, 9,212 people were homeless in 2022. An Urban Institute initiative states there are only 7 million affordable units for 11 million households with extremely low incomes. Not only that, rent burden plays a part, and it has been stated that there is a shortage of 7.3 million affordable and available rental homes for renters with extremely low incomes in the US. And according to the article written by Ashley Grumis from Princeton University, on average, 3.6 million eviction cases are filed in the United States each year. This results in approximately 1.5 million eviction judgments annually. It is apparent that the housing crisis is a pressing issue that affects communities nationwide. If it is affecting so many people nationwide, how is it affecting those in our communities with disabilities? How is it affecting those with mental health or substance abuse challenges, all of whom require additional support? Our speaker tonight will not only provide us with further insight on these issues, she will also spend time educating us on how to navigate the system and will provide us with additional resources. We will leave plenty of time for question and answer at the end. If you would like to type your questions in the chat box during our conversation, please do so. It is an honor to introduce our guest speaker, Beth Nabors, the Executive Director of Journeys the Road Home, a nonprofit agency dedicated to providing shelter and social services to the homeless and those at risk of homelessness in the North and Northwest suburban Cook County communities. Journeys is more than just an organization. It is a beacon of hope for individuals and families who have fallen on hard times. Their mission is twofold: to individually assess and serve their clients and to foster community awareness and involvement. Beth has dedicated many years of her life to the nonprofit sector. 10 of those years were spent working in the substance abuse and mental health fields. It was through her experiences that led her to the homeless services industry, where she has spent the last several years striving to make a difference in the lives of those in need. As the executive director at Journeys, Beth is entrusted with the responsibility of setting the vision and providing leadership to her organization. She is passionate about growing programs to meet their ever-evolving needs of our community. In fact, just this past Saturday, on May 20th, the grand opening and ribbon cutting ceremony of the Building of Hope took place, where the agency has launched its Building for Hope capital campaign to construct a year-round, 24-hour, comprehensive two-story facility that will include a supportive service center for long-term case management, primary health care, substance abuse treatment, vocational development, ongoing food assistance, and more, as well as a year-round shelter site with separate accommodations for men, women, and families with on-site permanent affordable apartment units. Really great. Congratulations to you, Beth. Very well done. It's very inspiring, amazing work.
Thank you.
Of course. We are so thrilled to have you here tonight to further educate us on this ever important topic of housing. So with all to ado, I am honored to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Beth Nabors.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm very pleased to be here with all of you. So I will just add to what Bree started with and tell you a little bit more about myself and our agency, and then we'll move on to the topic. So as Bree had stated, I'm Beth Nabors. I'm the Executive Director of Journeys the Road Home. I have been with that organization for the last 24 years in the role of Executive Director. And I've lived in the northwest suburbs of Cook County for the last, oh my goodness, since 1967. So what I want to tell you a little bit about is Journeys. So if you want to pop onto the next screen, Bree, that would be really helpful. Journeys, the mission of Journeys, as you can see here, is to actually assess and serve the homeless and near homeless population while educating our community and making them more aware of what the problem is. We provide wraparound services to people who are experiencing homelessness near homelessness in the northwest suburbs of Cook County. So the near homelessness are clients who we consider prevention clients. So they live in the northwest suburbs in their own homes, but they're not stably housed for whatever reason that might be. It might be mental health issues, substance abuse issues, poverty. It could be a domestic violence situation or losing a job. But we have found over the years that it is far more effective to keep people in their homes, wrap services around them, than to allow them to slide down into a homeless situation. In fiscal year 2021 and 2022, our last complete year, Journey served over 800 clients. We provided 11,945 services and 38,591 nights of shelter were provided. Now, this is also a little interesting caveat. COVID shut down our community services as far as shelter goes, and we had to move everybody into a hotel system. So for the last 3 years, we've had people in our hotels locally, and that has at a cost of about $4 million. But when we all bunkered in for COVID, people who are homeless without affordable housing only had our shelters to rely on. And when the volunteers and the churches shut down, they needed a place to bunker in as well. So that's why we started the hotel program. So we also had difficulty back when I was hired on in 1999 to merge two nonprofits, Northwest Suburban Pads and Hope Now Incorporated. We merged them and we did great with shelter and we did great with supportive services, but what we couldn't do was house people. We had the hardest time getting people housed in the northwest suburbs of Cook County when they were ready to be housed because of affordability and lack thereof. We also didn't have the supportive services that were necessary. So at that point, I had to start looking around for options. And none of the communities were very welcoming to the concept of creating housing that was affordable and supportive. So I started a nonprofit 501c2, which is a real estate holding company called Pathway Development Institute. And it allowed me to have houses and apartments that the community did not see connected to Journeys. And then I was able to put people in and house people. And to this day, we've only had one eviction. And that is because of the way in which we structured the program. Now, that wasn't easy to do. And we have not grown very quickly because of NIMBYism, which is not my backyard. And we have to fight that in the northwest suburbs. Well, really all over the state, but particularly in the northwest suburbs because it is defined as a more affluent area. And so it's very difficult to get things in like affordable and supportive housing in the area. So why did homelessness start anyways? So poverty has been around since the beginning of time, but mass homelessness started in the late 1980s. Around the same time my agency Journeys popped up. And the reason why mass homelessness started in the late 80s is because our state restructured mental health services and our state shut down residential beds. And those beds were utilized by families in the past for family members who needed to have stabilization. And they were able to have them housed in state-run facilities where they could be stabilized. Families could visit, families could be part of the recovery process. But then in the late 80s, that changed. And they moved the majority of mental health services into community-based outpatient settings. There's few agencies that do supportive housing like Kenneth Young in our area or Alexian Brothers, but they're not very many. And what happened is waiting lists became very long. The burden of stabilization fell onto the families. Family members aren't trained and they weren't educated to know how to intervene when their family members were symptomatic or not wanting to stay on their medications. And so families started to break apart. And when families started to break apart, there needed to be places for people to sleep. And that's when mass homelessness started and agencies like mine cropped back up. Can I get the next slide, please, Brie? So home, the concept of home, concept of a house. Everyone needs safe, decent, stable housing. For people with mental illness, a home helps them get adequate treatment and start on the path towards recovery. Some conditions make it difficult for people to maintain a stable home without additional help. Supportive housing is a highly effective strategy that combines affordable housing with intensive coordinated care. Together, the strategy can provide the needed assistance. Next screen, please. So what is supportive housing and why do we need it? Although affordable housing is part of the solution, some people may need their housing coupled with supportive services to maintain it. For instance, service providers can help people with mental illness pay their rent on time. And sometimes they need to help with understanding their rights and responsibilities outlined in their lease. So when they're in a supportive housing environment, they have access to case managers who help the individual understand some of these more complicated ideas, especially if they're struggling with developmental disabilities or mental health or a substance abuse issue. A lot of research has been done, and a broad body of research shows that supportive housing effectively helps people with disabilities maintain stable housing. People in supportive housing use costly systems like the ER less frequently, and they're less likely to be incarcerated. Supportive housing also can aid people with disabilities in getting better health care. It's a real simple concept. Housing and healthcare coupled together make healthy people. Next slide, please. So policymakers and administrators and health providers are increasingly aware that a lack of stable housing can interfere with health goals, and that linking healthcare with affordable housing can produce better outcomes. It definitely produces better outcomes for people than doing it separately. So the problem is there's not nearly enough supportive housing to meet the need. Next screen, please. Policymakers can create additional supportive housing in many different ways, and there's 4 top ways. One is providing additional rental assistance and other housing resources. As simple as that. The other is interesting. It's reinvesting savings that are created by supportive housing programs, because people aren't using ERs as often, and they're not being sent to correctional institutions. And they put that back into the development of supportive and affordable housing. The third way is making greater use of Medicaid services for supportive housing. Currently, that's not a resource that's tapped into to help develop supportive housing. And I think that is a really strong financial arm that could help this process. And the last is targeting supportive housing only for those who truly need it, those who could not support and stabilize in other levels of care. Next screen, please. So supportive housing is a highly effective strategy that combines affordable housing with intensive coordinated services to help people struggling with chronic mental health issues maintain stable housing and receive appropriate health care. So there's 7 essential characteristics of supportive housing that help this happen. One is supportive housing is permanent and affordable. Tenants generally pay no more than 30% of their income on rent based on program structures. They have the same rights and responsibilities as other renters, such as having their lease in their name and the right to privacy in their unit. That means that they cannot be evicted for reasons unrelated to being a good tenant. The second is services are housing oriented. The main focus and the main goal is keeping people housed. Service providers help people find suitable housing, build relationships with their landlords, and understand their rights and responsibilities as renters. Providers also intervene to prevent evictions. Next slide. Services are multidisciplinary. So service providers also help tenants address physical health, mental health, and substance use conditions, and help with other issues like applying for Social Security benefits, getting a library card, incorporating themselves into the community, or gaining employment. Teams of professionals such as mental health and substance use specialists, nurses, doctors, and case managers all work together to provide care. Services must be flexible enough to address each individual's tenant's needs, which may involve multiple service agencies working together. These teams also try to link people into mainstream service systems like work training if appropriate. So some examples of that at Journeys is we work very closely with Palatine Library. Anyone coming in for services at Journeys can access full services at the library. We work very closely with POC, which is a local organization that helps with interpretive skills and also helps getting people into training programs. And we work with Northwest Compass. We provide shelter and housing, but we don't have rental assistance. Northwest Compass receives grants for rental assistance. So we coordinate the care together in order to move people's stabilization forward. So services are voluntary and assertive. That's very important because a tenant in a supportive housing situation has the right to decide not to participate in any of the programs or services, and their ability to stay living there is not linked to that. So they won't be evicted by not participating. However, the case managers are very assertive and continue to revisit that person, offering them the services like a menu at dinner and continuing to see if they're doing okay and checking in on them. That keeps them connected and has a better chance of getting their involvement. Integration is another part of the program. Individuals and families are able to live independently in their apartments or single-family homes in residential neighborhoods. Tenants in supportive housing should have access to public transportation, grocery stores, parks, and other neighborhood amenities common to all other residents. Services are usually provided in clients' units or buildings or at a place of their choosing in the community, and clients should not lose access to services if they choose to live somewhere else. Less accessibility services put tenants' housing and health at risk. If they are unable to travel to providers' offices, for instance, they may stop using the services. Next slide, please. There is an emphasis on choice. Supportive housing maximizes clients' choice in client housing options and the services they receive. For instance, tenants can generally come and go as they please and have control over their daily schedule, like meal times and visitors. They also can direct the types of services they receive and the goals they set with the service providers. And there's low barriers to entry. Supportive housing providers do not require clients to hit benchmarks before moving into housing or put other screening barriers in the way. Blanket bans on people with criminal histories or bad credit, for example, or requirements to meet goals like employment or completing a course of treatment before entering supportive housing would screen out the very people we're trying to serve. Next slide, please. The vast majority of people who live in supportive housing are able to stay stably housed in the community. Research has examined the effect of supportive housing on other outcomes like mental and physical health, and the use of healthcare systems, corrections, and other systems. The research supports three main conclusions. One, supportive housing helps people with disabilities live stably in the community. Two, people with disabilities in supportive housing reduce their use on costly systems like the ERs, corrections, our police department's intervention. And three, supportive housing can help people with disabilities receive more appropriate healthcare and may improve their health. Next slide, please. So supportive housing helps people with disabilities live stably in our community. Supportive housing achieves much better housing stability than case management without rental assistance. Tenant housing stability in supportive housing is similar to stability in more segregating housing and service models like group homes, nursing homes, but tenants highly prefer supportive housing. And part of that is because of the independence that comes with it. When you're in other housing situations, everybody eats at the same time. Everybody gets showers at the same time. Everybody goes grocery shopping at the same time. And in supportive housing environments that are scattered, that allows an individual to have some more freedom. People with mental illness and other service disabilities are also more likely than others to be incarcerated or to enter long-term healthcare institutions like nursing homes or psychiatric hospitals, or to cycle between institutionalization and homelessness. Many studies show that supportive housing successfully interrupts the cycle. People with histories of incarceration or institutionalization significantly reduce their use on those systems after moving into supportive housing. And part of that has to do with the fact that we change their idea of normalcy. We change the environment of which they have become accustomed to. By having people integrate into communities, they create peer groups of people with all different life experiences, with all different types of stabilities. with all different types of barriers. They start to have a more collective support group. And that's really important for allowing people to feel that they are one part of a community. And that's very important for stabilization. And that is something that supportive housing does for people. Next slide, please. One of the largest studies to date that documents these reductions conducted in New York City found that individuals placed in supportive housing spent on an average 115 fewer days per person in homeless shelters. That's huge. 75 fewer days in state-run psychiatric hospitals, and almost 8 fewer days in prison or in jails in the 2 years after entering supporting housing compared to a smaller group without supportive housing. People with disabilities who lived in supportive housing after release from jail or prison were 61% less likely to be re-incarcerated 1 year later than those not offered supportive housing. Next screen, please. Despite its effectiveness, few of the people who would benefit most from supportive housing actually receive it. There are no exact estimates of either the need for or supply of supportive housing, though there are some good data on homelessness. To meet the need, policymakers should consider 4 interrelated strategies to expand supportive housing. 1, provide additional rental assistance and development resources. 2, reinvest savings created by supportive housing to add to the stock of rental assistance. 3, increase the use of medical services for supportive housing. And 4, target supportive housing only for those who need it. We've heard this already. I've restated this twice. And the reason why is because these are 4 very simple steps that our government can focus on to make sure that the pool of affordable supportive housing is ready and available for those who need it. Next screen, please. Most rental assistance is federally funded, yet only 1 in 4 eligible low-income households receives assistance. Expanding available rental assistance is essential to meeting the need for supportive housing. Several options are available to federal, state, and local policymakers to expand rental assistance. Service providers and advocates could build partnership housing providers to help them target more federal rental assistance for supportive housing. But how do families do this on their own? They can't do this on their own. They need to be linked up with nonprofits that are fighting the fight with them. They need to have somebody walking the path with them of how to navigate the system. How do we know where these resources are? And how do we get on the lists in order to ensure that our family member gets up through the rank to be able to receive supportive and affordable housing? Next slide, please. So state and local program administrators can target vouchers and subsidize units that become available, specific populations to provide supportive housing, but they are not required to, and few currently do. Some examples in the northwest suburbs are that they will make agreements for developers to create beautiful condos, and portions of them are supposed to go to supportive and affordable units. Well, when phase 2 comes around and those are supposed to be developed, the developer doesn't do it. And so they simply get fined for not meeting that requirement. And the village receives that money and it goes into their general operating budget, and affordable units are not created. State and federal policymakers could direct more development resources to supportive housing, especially in certain high-cost, low-vacancy areas and some rural areas where rental assistance alone may be difficult to use. Development subsidies are needed to create more supportive housing. Now, that's an interesting concept because, yeah, it's easier to put these things out in the rural area. And it also provides services for people who are in rural areas who cannot get to as many resources in more of the urban areas. However, they're also needed in the urban areas, regardless of the density and regardless of the fact that communities rally in NIMBYism. We need to not create systems that are blanket systems to pop up all throughout the state. We need to really be able to know our communities, know what our communities need, work within our villages and our townships to have these built in ethical and transparent ways so that the people who need them can get them. Next slide, please. Many people, even those with disabilities, can remain stably housed without supportive housing intensive services. To best use available resources, supportive housing providers should ensure they admit only those who cannot succeed with a lower level of care. In addition, a system should be in place to move people who no longer need supportive housing into lower levels of support. So this is super important because supportive, affordable housing is permanent. So when people get into those situations, there is, by the structure of the program, unless they break rules, they cannot be forced out. So their leases can be renewed. However, not everybody needs that level of care after they stabilize. They could be appropriate to move into mainstream housing with outpatient case management or outpatient counseling to help support them, family visiting them. And the problem is there's not a system in place that really evaluates that on an ongoing basis. And so once somebody gets into the program, they're in the program, they're engaged in all of the services. But where is that system that assesses when somebody can move to a less intensive level of care, thus opening up that apartment for somebody else who needs it? So there is currently no single standardized assessment that differentiates between people who need supportive housing and those who do not. So that would be a good effort for our governmental policymakers to start focusing on that, because again, that would allow us to open up more units for people who are really in need of this level of care. Providers often create their own assessment to target supportive housing for people who have been homeless for long periods of time, have multiple disabilities, have failed to remain healthy or stably housed with other treatments, or use healthcare and corrections frequently. Yet no measure is perfect, and people will differ significantly in how long they need supportive housing. So supportive housing providers must also have a process to move people to less intensive supports, though they likely will continue to need long-term rental assistance to afford housing in the community. So Journeys does that as well as far as our partnerships. Our supportive housing is also permanent, and how we handle our situation is somebody will move in and their rent will be as little as $250 a month, but their lease will only be for 1 month, and case management will be very engaged in their lives. There's a lot of restrictive rules and a lot of ways in which they need to be engaged. But as time goes on, we pull out, as they stabilize, we pull out a little bit more from their lives as far as how intensely we connect with them on a daily, every other day basis. Their rent increases a little bit and their lease increases a little bit. And this continues with their stay with us until they're up to a 12-month lease and their rent gets to the place where it's pretty close to mainstream living. And at that point, we start assessing whether or not they are capable of moving into the regular market housing. And we start those discussions. And in the years we've done our housing affordably, we have, again, only had 1 eviction. So it's a pretty successful model. Next screen, please. So the building blocks for supportive housing. Supportive housing is created from rental assistance services and in some cases, development funding. Rental assistance, low-income households usually cannot afford market rate rents. And the rents they can't afford don't cover owners' costs of operating and maintaining the housing. Rental assistance fills that gap. Tenants usually pay 30% of household income for rent, and the rental assistance covers the rest. Next slide, please. Rental assistance comes in 2 forms, tenant-based and project-based. So households with tenant-based rental assistance select a privately owned unit. The assistant moves with them if they relocate, which may enable them to move closer to family, service providers, or jobs. So when you have a tenant-based rental assistance, it's almost like a golden ticket card. So you're able to continue to assess the market, look at different apartments that receive your voucher, and be able to move yourself through the system of housing with your voucher. Project-based rental assistance is attached to specific apartments by contract, and they subsidize stays with the unit if the tenant moves. So that is more when you find a Section 8 housing situation or a development that has gone up to help people with supportive housing, which we, at the end of this presentation, I will have a list of resources that show in our community where we have some of those more project-based rental programs. Next slide, please. So supportive services funding is usually combined with multiple federal, state, and local grants. Federal funding is often restricted to specific groups. For instance, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration funds services for people with mental health and substance abuse disorders. The Administration for Children and Family Programs can support family stability, and the Department of Veterans Affairs provides healthcare for veterans. Medicaid provides health insurance coverage to low-income families and individuals and is designed to be a stable funding source for healthcare. Medicaid is available to anyone who qualifies, in contrast with the programs above, which are constrained by set funding levels and can provide a broad range of services and supports, but not all states provide supportive housing related health services through Medicaid. Next slide, please. Many supportive housing providers rely on existing private market housing, which tenants can lease with the help of rental assistance. But some supportive housing providers develop and operate their own properties, which requires funding to acquire, build, or rehabilitate the housing. Developing supportive housing enables providers to configure the space to accommodate on-site services with their tenants. Needs and development is important in markers where there are little available rental housing, such as high-cost urban areas and some rural areas. Grants and other development subsidies are used in many projects to reduce the amount that a developer must borrow to finance development, which allows the owner to offer lower rents since less rental income is needed to cover the owner's loan costs. Next slide, please. So here's some resources I want to talk to you guys about, and then we'll go into some of the specific ways that Journeys has attended to this process and some specific ways that you might be able to navigate the system. And we'll stay on this slide so you have an opportunity while I talk to maybe take down some of this information if it's important to you. So the local supportive housing in Cook County, the agencies that work to help develop and assure that these are done throughout the area. There's 2 nonprofits in the area that do some very substantial work in the area of supportive housing, and that's Thresholds, which is located in the Chicago area and throughout the suburbs, and Kenneth Young, which is located and serves the Elk Grove, Schaumburg area. The Housing Authority of Cook County, Housing Opportunity Development Corporation, and Upholding. Now, the last 2, well, really the last 3, focuses on resources and development of housing, where the top 2 are more on operating that housing and providing the services within the housing. Now, there's other agencies that do this as well, but these are some of the main holds in the Northwest suburbs that provide this type of assistance to people who are struggling with mental health, developmental disabilities, substance abuse, and are in need of housing. Some of the developments that have been project-based and have been built here in the area, and if you've been aware or paying attention to some of the news stories or some of the struggles within the village and community going back and forth, you'll be aware of these names. And I've given locations of where they are located as well. So if you're interested in driving by them or looking to see if there's any openings, those are located here on the screen as well. So let's start with Hart's Place. So Hart's Place is in Arlington Heights. And Hart's Place is a 2-story permanent supportive housing development for people living with a disability. Housing Opportunity Development Corp., so those are the guys up in the top section, developers, provides the property management and service coordination while supportive services are made available through a network of community-based service providers to help tenants live their best lives. So at Hart's Place, they link up with local nonprofits to help go in and do the case management and what have you, but Housing Opportunity Development Corp is the one that does property management and make sure, they come in and help if something breaks down, takes care of the lawn care, those types of things. So it's these coordination efforts together that made Hearts Place possible. Now, in addition to that, the new development was started by Upholdings over a decade prior to the completion in 2019. So that's something that's really important for you to know as well, that they were working for 10 years prior to the completion in 2019. It is a very, very long process, not only with battling worries of property values going down or crime in the area. There's also some very restricted ordinances in our communities that make people go through special use, and the townships get upset about things getting taken off of the tax rolls, and residents get upset about having to have their taxes go to supplement something of that nature. But over time, it proves to be very beneficial for a community. This property specifically is certified green, has on-site offices, a gazebo, ample parking, and attractive landscaping. And the unfortunate thing, though, is a lot of times there's no vacancies. And so even as these are getting built, it's really important, if housing is needed for you or your loved ones, that you're staying very on top of village meetings, going and hearing those meetings or getting online, because that's where you're going to find out if a developer is trying to come in to do affordable housing. And that's really important to know that timing, because when those waiting lists open up, you want to be the first one on that waiting list, because it's only a matter of a week or two and those things fill up, because as we said, the resources are not enough to fill the need. So another location is Crescent Place, and that's also located in Arlington Heights on Rand Road. Now, Crescent Place is a brand new 40-unit, 4-story affordable mid-rise community for families in Arlington Heights. This one you probably have seen going up. It's on Rand Road right before you hit the apartments, making your way north, heading towards Palatine. For a long time, it just had a big stack of cinder block going up, which ended up being the elevator. But it had a lot of interest, and there was a lot of meetings surrounding this, and a lot of fights over this. And they're still in the process of building it right now. Its expected completion is the fall of 2023. So Housing Trust Group partnered with Turnstone Development Corporation, whose focus is to facilitate the creation and preservation of affordable housing in Illinois. So that's another name that wasn't mentioned on top, but another name to pay attention to, Turnstone Development Corporation. They're into pushing for affordable and supportive housing. There's 39 affordable housing units and 1 manager unit in this facility. 31 units are set aside at 60% area medium income, and 8 units are set aside at 30% area medium income. So as you can tell, 31 units are not necessarily meeting the requirement of the 30% affordability, okay? So it's really important to see that this is listed as one of our affordable supportive programs in the area, but there's only 8 out of the 39 units that are actually at the 30% area medium income. So it's important to note. Still a success, still a resource for our community. And this one's located again on Rand Road. It's still under construction. Construction began in July of 2022. It's expected completion in fall of 2023, and they will be leasing soon. So this is a place that if you are in need of this for any of your family members or interested in it for somebody that you know, this is the one that you might have an opportunity to get in on. Crescent Place on Rand Road in Arlington Heights. The next place is Axley Place, I think is how you say that. It's an affordable housing development that provides permanent supportive housing for people living with a disability. It completed in September of 2017. The property consists of 2 two-story buildings that were constructed with the first floor at grade for accessibility, and they are also energy efficient and certified green. Residents have access to a full spectrum of supportive services which encourage independent living and are tailored to their individual needs. Under the coordination of HODC, so again, it's the Housing Opportunity Development Corp. Services are made available through a network of community-based organizations, service providers like Journeys and other agencies. They're located in Glenview, and currently there is a waiting list. Spruce Village is in Palatine. So Spruce Village is an apartment building constructed as a permanent supportive housing development. Tenants have access to full spectrum of supportive services, which encourage independent living and are tailored to their individual needs. Under the coordination of the Housing Opportunity Development Corp., services are made available through a network of community-based service providers. And currently, they're all booked. The next one is PhilHaven. It's permanent supportive housing. PhilHaven is a 3-story apartment building featuring 50 fully furnished units and a variety of community spaces indoors and outdoors. It's located near many amenities. The development provides critical housing opportunities for individuals and families living with disabilities in the northwest suburbs of Cook County. Residents are considered for PhilHaven will include adults with any sorts of disabling condition that is serious enough to cause a disability, but not so serious as to require institutionalized or supervised living. Case management is made available to all residents regardless of service needs. The development includes a community room with small kitchen, laundry facilities, and offices for on-site staff. It's located in Wheeling. And the nonprofit partner is Kenneth Young Center, so they're the exclusive partner. And there are openings, but waiting lists right now at PhilHaven. So Parkview. Parkview is a 45-unit new construction apartment building in downtown Arlington Heights that serves a mix of individuals and families of all income ranges. The building includes 2 floors of indoor parking and 5 floors of residential apartments, including 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. The project features on-site office space for property management and bike storage. It's located in Arlington Heights, as stated before. Their nonprofit partner is also Kenneth Young Center, and there is currently a wait list. The next is Myers Place. And Myers Place is a mixed-use development in Mount Prospect that provides 39 units of permanent supportive housing for persons living with disabilities. At its initial opening, Myers Place was not only the first permanent supportive housing project of its size in the market area, but was also a first for the northwest suburbs at large. The development provides individualized supportive services in the form of classes, case management, counseling, transportation assistance, and health screenings. These services are provided voluntarily to tenants, and the first floor features a leased commercial space. So this one is Kenneth Young Center, and this wait list is currently closed. So the last is Prospect Homes. Prospect Homes is originally developed by nonprofit builders of skills and later acquired by Avenues of Independence. HODC acquired these existing townhomes in 2016 to provide supportive housing for low-income residents with disabilities. Thresholds provide supportive services to its members with on-site staff. Each townhome is 2 stories with a full basement. The living room, dining room, kitchen, and bathroom are on the first floor with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. There's 1 unit with an elevator and ramp for accessibility, and this one has an open wait list right now. So those are our current resources in the area, and much more is needed. But it's a very, very long process to create these types of programs. It's a long process for funding, to get your funding in place, and to make sure you create the partnerships with those entities that are needed to promote success. And then there is a long process with your village and your township to assure that you're able to pull this property off the tax rolls, because it's going to be usually run by a nonprofit, and that you are in compliance with all village ordinances and codes so that you'll be able to move seamlessly through construction or rehab, whatever you might have. And then you need to have a really good service and coordinated contract with the social service agencies that you are planning to either have on site or coordinate with offsite. So it takes a very long time to get to this place. And it's taking too long, quite frankly. So you have agencies like mine that try to do it in different ways. I kind of laugh and say we're the stealth bomber of nonprofits, because we created the nonprofit real estate holding company because it was the only way that as a nonprofit service provider, we could go into our own development and create what we felt our community needed. So not many people utilize that category of 501c2, which is a real estate holding company, to be able to create some of these buildings and then through partnership provide the services with another nonprofit 501c3. But that is also another creative way to do this. It allows you to move through communities in a very quiet way. And it allows you to get people housed that are in need. And again, our location, we have 2 apartment buildings that are located right next to each other. We were very blessed, both were donated to us. And so we have a pretty nice size, substantial connected lot. At full capacity, we can house 16 individuals that were once on the street. And again, as I stated before, we've only had 1 eviction since 2009. Everybody else has been stellar tenants, been real upholding citizens to the community, have integrated into the neighborhood beautifully. And we are situated in a affluent area of Palatine. We're right behind the $1 million row homes on Smith Street. And the tenants there know, for the most part, that this is a affordable and supportive housing, but we don't announce it. There aren't signs on the wall, and different than these individuals that and these individual programs that I've mentioned here on the resources. We're very quietly doing our affordable supportive housing in the northwest suburbs, because with the connection to homelessness comes a lot of prejudice, and more so than just opening up affordable housing. There's a lot of misconception about people who are homeless, and we're constantly trying to educate the community that homelessness is a microcosm of society. Every problem that somebody who's homeless struggles with, people who are housed struggle with. The only difference is that when you're housed, you have 4 walls and a roof to allow you respite, privacy, and peace from the outside world, and not having everybody know what you're struggling with behind the closed door. But when you're homeless, your issues aren't necessarily different, but your issues are exposed, and there's nowhere for you to find respite. So that really is the only difference between somebody who is housed and somebody who is unhoused. And unfortunately, when somebody has been labeled as being homeless, I prefer to say somebody who is without a home, because we start with the fact that they're a human first, and their situation is being without a home. Just like we say, instead of the mentally ill, we say people who are struggling with mental illness. I think it's super important to be appropriate and forward-facing with the way we label and talk about individuals, to assure that we start with their human status and we move on to what it is that they're struggling with in definition. So at that point, I have concluded my presentation a bit early. I see I'm a fast speaker. So Bree, if you'd like to open this up for questions, if there are any, I'd be happy to answer any of those.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much, Beth, especially with that ending, putting people first. I think that's just so important. And you said it so graciously. And thinking about the barrier, right? The only difference is that you don't have your privacy, and not really something that you think of. And I just really appreciated the way that you presented that and shared that information. That was wonderful. So thank you for the really important information. Thank you for sharing the resources. I know that is definitely huge for our members, our participants. And so now I'm sure we do have some questions. I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat for everyone. If you have any questions, go ahead and place it in the chat. I did see somebody's hand was raised. I don't know if I can unmute you. Let me see. It's the first time I've ever done that. Oh, it went away. That's okay. Okay, so one of the questions does state, what is the website to contact your organization about your housing in Palatine?
Sure. My website is, and that was remiss of me, I should have put my own website up here. My website is www.journeystheroadhome.org. So that is JOURNEYSTHE ROADHOME.org. www.journeystheroadhome.org.
It's a great website too. I looked it up a couple additional times.
Absolutely. And again, real quickly, if the website doesn't feel as easy to navigate and you're wanting to sit down and have a call with me, get your pen ready. Here's my phone number. It's 847
Oh my gosh.
963-9163. And I'm at extension 112. I would be happy to field any calls, try to navigate and help you through the system as best as I can. We're a community-based organization. We were raised by our community and we're here to help support it. So feel free to pick up the phone as well.
Wow, you're so awesome. It was so generous. Thank you for that. Okay, so next question, it says, what is the definition of disability as you use it? For example, what sorts of disabilities are acceptable in housing?
So disability has to do with what would hinder you from being able to live in mainstream housing without any support. So a disability can include somebody who has a developmental disability. Like some of the people who come to our shelter has, especially in the congregate shelter system, has a very hard time navigating between the shelters. And over the years, we found people who would maybe get lost going from one shelter to the next. There were some incidents where the police were involved, where somebody got very worried that they'd overwalked or missed the shelter, sat at somebody's porch on a rocking chair. The people, of course, were startled that an adult was on their porch, called the police, and it turned out it was somebody who was just trying to get to one of my shelters and was struggling with being able to navigate the map and the streets. So that's the whole reason when Bree mentioned in the beginning that I just finished a housing project, a capital campaign, and have a community building. The shelter on the second floor is going to serve just that population. So we're still going to have our scattered sites with our partnerships with our churches for people more like myself who maybe come upon hard times but can navigate a map, or I can drive a car, or I don't have any kind of presenting problems that might make it difficult in a congregate shelter setting. That's what our congregate shelters are now going to do more as far as service. And that if somebody becomes homeless in the middle of the night, that's where the police will take you to our congregate shelters. But in this building, we have 42 beds now that will be opened up as soon as we finish the furnishing of everything on the second floor. The first floor is open. But in that is going to be more of those special pops. So the individuals who have, and again, my disabilities. So I only hit one right now. I sidetracked, I'll get back to it. But it's going to hit those individuals because we have 24-hour case management on site. We're going to have security people on site. That way we can help people maintain their medications. They can be stored consistently in our congregate shelters. They're carrying them in backpacks till they get to the next shelter. And if it needs to be refrigerated, that's not a great setup for them. So we are working with that population in our building, and then our congregate shelter sites will handle individuals who are not needing that intensity of care. So another disability is mental health issues. So the disability can be, again, mental health is situational or chronic. More than 80% of society has dabbled in mental health on one day or another in their lives. And so the disability can be in the mental health arena, and it is the onus of the agency and the individual to determine whether this is a situational episode with mental health or if this is a chronic episode with mental health. And that creates a disability in itself through the entire spectrum. Substance abuse and addiction. Currently, it's not listed in the DSM as far as a diagnosable condition that allows you to get Medicaid or Medicare. It used to be. But again, somewhere around the 80s, early 90s, it was removed from the diagnostic manual as something that is to be recognized. But social service agencies recognize it as a disability. We recognize it as something that is pervasive, and it's found to be in the way in which your brain functions in response to things. So we recognize that that's considered a disability as well. And then there's obviously disabilities that are physical. And the disabilities can be about mobility, and it could be also a combination. So we have psychiatric disorders that obviously manifest physically, and we have physical disorders that manifest psychologically. So there's some crossover. So disability is a very broad brush. And in some of these housing programs, there are specific types of disabilities that they work with some of the housing programs. But an agency like mine at Journeys, it is a broad sweep. Because our primary presenting focus at Journeys is poverty. That means that we hit every issue that creates people's financial instability. So we deal with people with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, domestic violence, rape, sex abuse, any kind of thing that puts people in a situation that breaks them down or locks them down and stops their ability to sustain themselves financially. And so we have a real wide variety of clinical staff that can shift from one client to the next based on who presents at their office. Because we also sign people up first come, first serve, because homeless people tend to not have computers or phones to set up appointments. So there's no schedule of who's going to present in your office in the next case. So our staff needs to be able to shift on a dime. So we have very broad skilled individuals who've come to us with very high skills and education so that they're able to do that. So long answer, I tend to do that. Sorry about that, but disability is just a very broad range, and a lot of the times it depends on who you are coming in contact with based on what that definition will be. If you're working with a mental health agency, they only serve the mentally ill. If you're working with an agency, let's just say Wings, domestic violence, they only work with domestic violence. Journeys works with all of those issues.
Wow, that's incredible. Great. Thank you so much for that. Next question. What happens when residents need nursing care, including long-term skilled care nursing? Do caseworkers help with public aid?
Yeah, even at Journeys. Now, so I'll just talk from Journeys' point of view. We work on getting people entitlements. We have navigators of the system on our staffing base. So what will happen is when somebody comes in for services, the initial track is this: are you a prevention client or are you a homeless client? That's the first thing we just figure out. Are we working to keep you in your home, or are you already without and we have to find you one? So based on those tracks, then we go in and we do a very involved assessment on life domains, and we figure out what areas have been impacted in your life. If one of those situations we determine there's no way that you're going to be able to work on your own in a supportive housing situation, you're not going to be able to navigate our shelter system, you're in really bad shape. When you come to us, we instantaneously start working on long-term care, nursing home placement, and we try to put you in the most intensive level we have available while we're wrapping services around you until we can get into that level of care that's most appropriate for you. But yeah, our case managers work on your entire case. So that means whatever might be presented to us, we start working it down, we prioritize it with you, and we start working on the most critical issues first, and then make our way down, sometimes all the way down to things like faith counseling, or working on how to, because a lot of our clients end up having situations where they've had a religious abuse. And it might be a very serious issue, but when we're looking at the fact that they're not housed, they're not on medication for their mental health, we work our way down, and eventually we get to every issue that's been presented, but sometimes we have to prioritize them to get to stabilization. So again, long answer short, yes, we do work on getting people to the right level of care that they need. And if you're in one of these programs, we talked about that through the presentation, and you first are established in the program because you are capable of being in a supportive housing environment. And as time goes on, that's not something you're able to maintain. It's usually picked up on by the case managers because things start to happen. Like your mobility starts to struggle, you're not able to get down to the dining area, you start to not participate in some of the groups, examples go on. And then at that point, discussions start working on what level of care is best for you.
Yeah, and it's so great too that you mentioned that you have caseworkers, case managers working 24/7. It sounds like you are very well equipped to handle those types of situations. That's wonderful. I think I interrupted you because I was so excited that you gave out your phone number. And so I don't know if everybody heard it.
Okay.
So if you don't mind giving it one more time for some.
Sure. Sure. Okay, it's 847-963-9163. and I'm at extension 112. But pretty much if you just call into that number, and if you don't get me, just keep pressing pound and another extension, you will get somebody who will help you figure the situation out. There's the secret squirrel, pound and another extension. But yeah, I'm at 112. So feel free to give me a call. I will always call people back within 24 hours. And unless it's the weekend, you won't get me till Monday. But we'll give you a ring back and we'll try to navigate the system for you.
That sounds so great. And there actually was somebody who posted in the chat asking if you could assist them with finding a place. So I feel, you just gave your phone number out. I feel that would be the most appropriate to give her a phone call.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, please do. During the summers, we don't have shelters, but we do still have a hotel program going right now until October 1st. So even if there is not a permanent housing situation that can be found immediately, there's ways to wrap services around you in the interim. So please do give us a call and we'll see if we're the right fit for you.
Thank you for that. Next question says, does the individual seeking housing have to be unhoused currently?
In some programs, yes, they do. So it goes back and forth based on the situation. It's all individualized. So let's say we have somebody who's fleeing a domestic violence situation and they're currently housed and they are seeking services without the knowledge of their partner. And so they're coming out to make sure that they can get out of that situation, but they're not jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. So they're wanting to make sure that they can get out of that situation and get into housing. So there is some of that work that happens. And so they are still eligible for things, but it might be that we have to do a real seamless transition. But some of the programs like the hotel stay program, you have to be out of housing in order to get into the hotel program based on the structure of the funding. So the hotel program was started because of COVID funding that came from the federal government down to the state, down to the county. And so when we were able to tap into that COVID funding, when our congregate shelters shut down, there's some real restrictions about that and what the government had decided they would be willing to fund. Now, that doesn't mean Journey still won't find resources for people. I mean, I have a clinical director who comes and strong arms me with money out of the GOE budget all the time because somebody doesn't fit a program. So there's ways that we can try to make it work. And if Journeys doesn't have it available, we have a plethora of other nonprofits that we work with and coordinate with that we might be able to help out with. But yeah, there are some programs, good question. There are some programs that you have to be actually legitimately homeless in order to access housing. But there are programs that you could be unstably housed and we can start some balls rolling. They might not be the traditional going straight into one of the government programs, but there might be other resources for you.
That was a really good question. Okay, next question. Also, how does one get on those waiting lists or find out when the housing opens? This is not for the family, but for a person in need of the housing themselves.
So almost any nonprofit that serves the poor or people struggling with poverty, like there's Northwest Compass, Journey's the Road Home, there's Connections for the Homeless, DuPage County PADS, Housing Forward. So there's tons of organizations that, and if you don't know how to find them, you can call us and we can help find them based on where your geographic location is because some of these agencies only serve, like I serve the northwest suburbs of Cook County. DuPage County PADS serves DuPage County. So there's all different types of organizations that kind of hand the baton off based on geographic locations. But if you were to give us a call, you met the eligibility, you could come into us and we get you on the waiting list. So there's these coordinated care organizations where you get on the waiting list and that goes for the state bed housing referral system. And so that gets you onto housing. The issue with those are that when housing opens up and it's offered to you, it might not be in your community. So it goes into a state network system to get on that list. Now, on these more current lists that you're looking at, some of these housing lists that you want to get into, we can pop right onto their websites, and their websites have open waiting lists for them. So the ones that I mentioned that said they have open waiting lists, you call directly into them and you can get on their waiting lists for it. And then like in those programs that are connected to Kenneth Young that I mentioned, we're connected to Kenneth Young. You could call directly to Kenneth Young and say, I'm really interested in Myers Place. or I'm really interested in one of your programs, and start working with them, because Kenneth Young is one of our strongest local nonprofit supportive housing partner. So if you're in their service area, they are a great place to start. And from another nonprofit, we really admire Kenneth Young services. From Journey's perspective, we find them to be very responsive and do very good individualized care. So they're a very good starting place, specifically for mental health issues.
That's great. Just out of curiosity, a question popped up on my end when you were talking about that. Do you know just generally how long people are typically waiting on those waiting lists? Is it typically pretty quick, or is it a very long process?
If you have insurance, it's much quicker. If you don't have insurance, it can be years. So some of our clients have been on a waiting list for some of the supportive housing programs for almost 3 years. People who have insurance move through it a little sooner if it's run by a nonprofit, like Kenneth Young Supportive Housing Program. They have a larger pool for insurance paying clients, and they have a much smaller pool for those who aren't insured. And it's for obvious reasons. In order for them to pay their bills and keep their lights on, it's much easier for them to be able to bill out their services. If they are bringing in somebody who doesn't have insurance, they have to rely on state funding and grants to come in. And a lot of times those payouts are very long. So an agency like Kenneth Young might be providing housing for somebody for 6 months before the state reimburses them. And so that really extends their resources as well. Those waiting lists can be very, the time frame can be can be variable. It all depends on what openings, when they open up, if somebody's been transitioned out to a lesser intensive level of care, or unfortunately they might pass away, which opens up a unit, or those types of things. So there is no set standard answer, unfortunately, that if you get on the waiting list in 2 weeks, you'll be in a house. It might be 2 months, it might be 6 months.
Okay. Next question says, is the income level in the housing in Palatine for those at 30% or 60% of area income?
So the housing that I have in Palatine, it starts out even lower than 30%. So we start off around when we have somebody come in, and also the structure is a little unique in the ones in Palatine. So in Palatine, it is, you rent the room and you have shared living room, kitchen, and bathroom facilities. So you're renting the actual room. So there's three bedroom units, and so you have 2 roommates. So we do a lot of roommate negotiations, and we do a lot of team meetings and making sure people are getting along well. And we also do a lot of front end, making sure that we are placing people who we perceive will get along well. But that pointing that out right away, that's different, because that's how we're able to serve more people and get them off the street faster. So that's how we do that model there. Now what was I'm going back to, I'm losing my track on the original question.
No, you were right on track. We were talking about the income level in the housing.
Oh, income level. That was it. So we started off in the apartments at about 200, 250 based on either whether you're bringing in an entitlement to pay for your apartment. So you might be on Social Security, disability, or something of that nature, or if you have a job. And so we started off there, and your lease is only going to be for a month at first, to make sure that this is going to be a good connection for you, your roommate, and your situation. Then as you stabilize and follow the program, your lease increases. So your lease will go to maybe 3 months, 6 months. And at that point, your rent increases a little bit. It increases to about 30%. So it stays at the affordability rate. And then at that point, you might make the decision that you do want to get into one of these other supportive housing programs, because we're very intensive. So at Journeys, we're way in everybody's business. And the reason why we are is because we're taking people who are straight off the street from our congregate shelters into housing, probably for the first time in a very long time. And so, and they're moving from a situation where they're either sleeping outside in their car or in the and parking garages into congregate shelter, where they're sleeping with a whole bunch of people. And then all of a sudden now we're moving them into their own bedroom, their own room closes off. So there's a lot of emotions that go along with that. Sometimes people get lonely because they've been in these very crowded congregate shelters and have created support groups. So sometimes there's some sabotaging that happens that way. There's a lot of different things that can slow down somebody's progression. But the units are actually permanent. So if somebody is very comfortable with us being in their business and paying 30% of the average rental market value, and they're okay with not having beer or booze in the refrigerator, and they can't have sleepover guests, then they can stay with us for the rest of their life. But if they decide they want to, have a beer in their fridge or have their girlfriend sleep over or want to, then they usually are like, hey, I only have to pay 50 more and I can live over La Tosca and downtown Arlington Heights and walk to the, Vale Jewel, I'm in. And then what we do is we usually will help them negotiate their lease, get them a big move-in kit, help them with furnishings, we move them in. And then once a client of Journeys, always a client of Journeys, so you can always come back to the day center, utilize our food pantry, you can have meals with us. But then the interesting thing happens is that when you're using your gas money to come all the way to Journeys to go to our food pantry and eat our meals, you start to realize that that money can go to groceries and you can just walk across the street. And so then all of a sudden you stop utilizing those services, and all of a sudden you're a contributing member of society and paying into taxes and going to the movies and restaurants, and you're moved on from Journeys, and you did it in a way that you get to own. And so that's, it's a really good thing. But then sometimes, people, when they get alone in their own apartments again, they will self-sabotage. And so they might end up back with us, and there's no shame in their game. We start all over and we start figuring out a way to get them back to stabilization and figure out how to avoid that loneliness or whatever it is that triggered them to come back our way instead of staying stabilized.
Yeah, that psychological change is
it's
definitely something to keep in mind. That's great that you provide all that for people. It's wonderful. Next question says, how large is your staff at Journeys?
When we are fully staffed, we have 20 staff. Right now, we only have 14.
Wow.
It is a it is a very hard market right now of bringing people in for a couple of reasons. One, people have gotten used to being able to work from home. And it's very hard for, specifically when we're bringing in like grant writers or something, for them not to understand why I want them in the office every day. And there's a lot of reason why. We cross-train at Journeys, so our grant writers do sit in with case management sessions and they do work in the kitchen. And I believe it takes somebody to walk in someone's shoes and sit with them in order to write good stories about why we need money to serve them. So that's important to me. And I need to have them there for that reason. But it's a hard market right now. So like I'm writing a few grants, and my background, I'm a therapist. Prior to moving into the administrative arm of my agency, I was a therapist for 10 years working with substance abusers and people who are struggling with mental health issues. And then I moved from being the direct service person to being their development director, and then moved on to Journeys. So I have the ability to dance in between the lines. And so when we're low on staff, a client might unfortunately have to meet with me.
Maybe that's why you have that perspective, because you've kind of worn all the hats. And I mean, I can agree with you on that, you know more if you are put in somebody else's shoes. It's a very interesting perspective. I love that.
It's super important. One of the things my staff jokes about is that I lead by doing. And so once a month I sit at the volunteer desk and I have to execute all the policies that I write so that I find out if they're silly or not, and whether they should stay in existence. And so once a month, typically something stops happening. Once a month I get in there, I'm like, why did I write this? Like, what is this about?
That is so funny.
And the staff loves Beth volunteer days because it makes them that we'll fine tune something.
Like that show Undercover Boss, if you've ever seen that.
Yeah, I'm not very undercover though. I kind of show up.
Yeah, exactly. Overcover Boss. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. We got a couple more questions. How are Journeys case management services billed? Is it through insurance?
We don't bill for case management services. So so we are not Medicaid, Medicare billable. Now we operate like we are because I come from an accredited agency. And so we do things, and this might be kind of jargon, but We do all of our case notes in SOAP form, so subjective, objective assessment and plan. That is the way in which you have to have your progress notes in order to be billable. We are in an industry that has not had the recognition it deserves or the accreditation it deserves. So we actually, as an agency, are planning to go through the CARF accreditation process, just so that we are continuing to focus on best practices, and making sure that we're doing things that would be able to become Medicare and Medicaid billable. So all of our services are free.
Great.
We don't charge for anything. Everything that we're able to provide, how I pay for salaries, how I keep the lights on, it's all grants. So the majority of our funding comes from actual individuals who live in the northwest suburbs of Cook County. Our second largest funding source is from family foundations that are local. Then it moves into local township, villages, and Cook County that funds us. And then it moves down from there. Faith-based locations, we have funding coming from that. And that is what gives the money into our operations so that we can do all of these programs and things of that nature. But no, we don't bill for anything. The only thing that somebody gets charged is if they end up in one of our housing units and they pay some rent.
Oh, that's great. It's pretty similar to NAMI, actually. Cool to hear that other organizations are doing that as well. It's great.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions for right now, it seems like. So the next one says, is there an organization like yours in Northwest Chicago?
There are organizations like mine all over Illinois, including going all the way down to Mattoon, Illinois. There's a Mattoon Pads. But there's an organization that's called Beds Plus. There's an organization called Housing Forward. There's an organization called Northwest Pads, which is Northwest Chicago Pads, which is in the Chicagoland area. There's organizations called Thresholds that are in Chicago, Heartland Health Outreach in Chicago. Then moving yourself out into the suburbs, there's tons of organizations additionally, like McHenry County Pads, Lake County Pads, DuPage County Pads. So there are lots of organizations like mine. They all started from the concept of PADS, which stands for Public Action to Deliver Shelter. And it actually originated in Aurora with an organization that's called Hesed House. And Hesed House started with a bunch of nuns who decided that there needed to be something done. And they created the model that took nonprofit and partnered with faith-based locations to provide shelter. And they started it with the name PADS, Public Action to Deliver Shelter. So all of these organizations only share the acronym PADS. Other than that, they're all uniquely run, but they do very similar things. So yeah, there's a lot of us.
Good to know and really good question. Next question says, what about senior citizens that are homeless?
We have a lot of senior citizens that are homeless. So we have a lot of individuals who come to us, a lot of vets. In fact, a lot of our vets who are PTSD actually live in the forest preserves. Because they have a very hard time being in the congregate shelter setting. Things like even a horn blowing could really set them off. If there's loud chaos, that can really set them off. So we even have a whole group of individuals who actually live throughout the northwest suburbs in our forest preserves, about a mile off the walking path, and spots that are pretty sophisticated. And we typically only see them on the very cold nights of the year and the very hot nights of the year, when it's just so intolerable to be outside. And they'll come in for brief periods of time, load up on stuff that they need, and then we don't see them for periods of time. But again, I digress. The older population makes up a big chunk of our population on our website. You can click on all of our annual reports for a bunch of years back, and you'll be able to kind of see the breakdowns of who we serve, their ages, the demographics. That's some really good reading, because it'll also allow you to see how we kind of changed over the years. Because homelessness is such a fluid position. It's impacted by so many things. It's impacted by the economy, current policies, government positions. It has to do with, obviously, we've learned the pandemic, healthcare impacts, and the healthiness of our environment impacts. So, our numbers fluctuate as far as how many people we serve each year. the presenting problems fluctuate, and then the demographics. We have a huge number of children and families right now, where in years past, we had more adult singles. So, things change over time based on what we're dealing with as a whole.
Oh, yeah. And thinking about that question and relating it back to your statement about the waiting list, and it's different based on insurance on the waiting list and how long it takes. We did a presentation, another webinar on elder law in March. So if you are interested in that field, that area, I do have a recording. So you can feel free to email me if you need more information about that. Okay, last question. Are you trying to buy more apartments or housing?
Oh, I would love to.
Like
So
Superwoman.
I'd love to. I just have to catch my breath a little bit from this capital campaign that we just finished, and because that started in 2017 actually, and so we were moving along at a fast clip until COVID hit, and then it really stalled us for a while. And then once we hit our target, we were able to really get it constructed quickly. But once I get that completely finished, and we're focusing on the second floor now, which is the apartments and the shelter, because again, we have 21 beds for men, 21 beds for women, and 7 affordable housing units. There's 5 efficiency units, which studios, the studios, and then we have 2 1-bedroom. So once that's all up and going and we open that up, that's going to be such a blessing. But then, yes, then I'm going to be focusing on my real estate holding company, and I'm really eyeballing a lot of the 3 flats that are up and down Northwest Highway. So I'm kind of looking at some of those. But and then I just kind of dive in like a little stealth bomber and buy them up, and then we'll see what happens from there. But yeah, that's my next. I'll be focusing on that in the next year or so.
That's so great. Seriously, like Superwoman.
It's a team. There's absolutely, I laugh all the time. I was hired to farm a garden that started way before me. And and it's the whole community that plants all the stuff in there. I just weed it.
That's awesome. I love that. Sounds kind of relaxing. So I did have, that was the last question that was on our list. Let me just make sure. Yep, that was the last question, but there was one comment that I thought is worthwhile to read. Somebody posted great presentation. I've been on the board of the Housing Task Force with Hugh Brady and Lori Grainall. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name. For 18 years, you've described the housing situation perfectly. We have never, in all caps, discussed those clients who no longer need the units to make room for new tenants. I'm going to bring it up at our next task force meeting. We are currently supporting a project being built in Elgin.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that there's so much work being done. Hugh Brady is a rock star, by the way, an absolute rock star. And he is behind a lot of these affordable supportive housing projects. And what he is very involved in right now is 708 board creations. So if you guys are familiar with 708 boards, it's a funding arm that goes in our townships that allow specialized funding just for mental health services and things that go towards the mentally ill. So Hanover Township has done a phenomenal job with their 708 board over the years. They were one of the only in the area. And they do fast emergency funding, fast support, and it pulls from the tax base, and it's just wonderful. Well, Hugh just got one approved at Wheeling Township. So Wheeling Township just started last month with a 708 board. They are right now going on a surveying process. So if you're interested in making sure they survey what our priorities are, contact Wheeling Township and say you want to be involved with their 708 board and as part of their surveying. And now they're working on doing one over in Palatine Township. So Hugh Brady is a rock star. He is one of the leaders in making sure that the mentally ill and those struggling with mental illness are heard, and the resources they need are addressed. And he is just wonderful. So when you just said his name, I was like, love that guy.
That's awesome. That's so
he's
great.
a great guy. Lori's good too.
Yeah. That's so great. Okay, well, it seems like we are out of questions. So with the 5 minutes remaining, I am going to just share a brief closing. Beth, thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us tonight. Thank you for answering all of our questions and just being so open to, being here. And again, congratulations. It's a huge accomplishment that happened just this past Saturday. So take some time for yourself, go celebrate or something, get yourself a nice dinner. So tonight, if you did enjoy tonight's program, there's definitely more information that you can find on our upcoming programs on our website at www.namiccns.org. Our next program will be held on June 14th from 7 o'clock to 8:30 with Bonnie Lane from the Family Support Service, who will provide us with some more information related to housing, maybe some things in more detail or from a different perspective, from a different organization as well. And so once you log off, I do want to mention that there is a brief survey. Kind of like Beth, we get all of our funds based on our data through grant writing. So if you would please spend a couple minutes taking that survey. Not only will it provide us with the data that we need to get these grants and to continue with our programs for free, but it will also give us insight on how to adjust or modify our program for next month. All right, well, we appreciate your presence tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again at another NAMI CCNS community webinar. Please take care of yourself and each other. Bye, guys. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Have a great night.
You too.